TV boy, I win, and that means this summer, TV trash is on the shelf, and my show is taking over! Get ready, rowdy friends, because the summer of the wrestling mark is coming! So, did you let him win out of pity, or so you could get a full summer off? A little column A, little column B. I'm the Wrestling Mark, and while it seems like every fandom out there is stuck in the past and lives on nostalgia, the wrestling fandom just might be the absolute worst. Everything was better in my day seems to be the mantra of the internet, and wrestling social media is no different. The smarks on the web desperately want you to think that nothing has been good in the wrestling world, at least since WCW closed down more than 20 years ago, and that wrestling was absolutely perfect back when wrestlers and promoters were all a bunch of liars and frauds telling you their product was every bit as authentic as baseball. To which I reply, am I the only person who actually studies history? Because whether you want to hear it or not, the egos of promoters and just overall bad decisions were commonplace way before Vincent Kennedy McMahon bought up his father's promotion in 1983, and still were in many other promotions for years later. And I think it's time you all need to be schooled on that. And so, for this summer, I'm going to show you what I believe to be the worst big event matches and finishes that many of you probably never heard of. Trust me, what I'm about to show you is gonna make WrestleMania 32 look like WrestleMania 17! Now, we are going to set some guidelines on this. First, all of these reviews are of wrestling events that took place in the 20th century. Second, there are no events from WWE, WWF, whatever you want to call it, or from WCW in the 1990s. That would be too easy. And finally, we are only going to focus on the main event for each event because that is what the shows were clearly sold on, and thus why the way they turned out makes each of these the absolute worst of the worst. So let's get started with Star Wars! Wrestling Star Wars was the creation of Jack Adkisson, a former college football star who became one of wrestling's earliest big heels, playing a Nazi sympathizer named Fritz von Erich. But sometime in the late 1960s, Adkisson bought up the territory he was in, somehow managed to turn himself face in some angle where Gary Hart revealed Von Erich's Third Reich persona was all an act or something. Really, pre-80s wrestling was confusing, and eventually transformed the territory into world-class championship wrestling. By the 1980s, World Class became the biggest NWA-sanctioned territory outside of the Southeast. KTVT in Dallas might not have been as big of a superstation as WTBS was, but it made World Class a big enough draw to attract many of the NWA's top stars to the Sportatorium on Industrial Boulevard for a big payday. Usually being booked to face the Von Erich kids like Kevin, Kerry, Chris, and Mike. There's no doubt in hindsight that Fritz Von Erich only saw his own promotion as a venue to hype up his own boys, but it worked as the Texas crowd just ate up and loved his sons and their clean-cut all-American image. Such irony from a guy who originally billed himself as a Nazi. Another advantage for World Class was being one of the first promotions to really show how television could elevate the status of wrestling. It was one of the first promotions to use multiple cameras and boom mics to make the TV audience feel more like they were there in person. Bill Mercer was one of the first announcers that could really build up a match into a story. And it would all help build up storylines that would hit the climax at a major wrestling super show featuring all the major stars. Debuting in 1981, Wrestling Star Wars may not have been broadcast live on any closed-circuit feed, but was built as the type of show that could fill full-size professional sports arenas, and it was hyped to become one of the biggest events on the calendar by 1982. That year, World Class appeared to hit the big time, as it was then that Kerry Von Erich was able to enter a program with the NWA champion himself, Ric Flair. Kerry had fought against Harley Race when he was the champion, but it was against Flair that everything really hit a crescendo. Now, I do need you to bear with me on some of the events I'm about to reference, because Wikipedia and other sources seem to be really confused on the chronological order and locations of some of their first matches. So I'm going to have to go off on what I alone can deduce from the information I could find, and apologies in advance if I get them wrong. It appears that Flair and Kerry's first match took place on August 15th at Reunion Arena at what was just the 5th Star Wars event ever. The fact that the event had been held that many times in just 14 months shows how it really was a precursor to the regular pay-per-view events we see today. And how does this incredibly hyped match end?
The referee has ruled that the match is totally out of control. A double disqualification. Therefore, Ric Flair retains the World Heavyweight Championship.
Oh, I could say something now, but you just wait on that. The two faced off again some weeks later at what I think was the Tarrant County Convention Center in Fort Worth, this time for a 2 out of 3 falls match. After Flair won the first fall by disqualification in a dusty finish, and I'll talk more about what that is in my next video, Kerry then got a pinfall via the Iron Claw to tie the match, and the third fall ended in, guess what? Another double disqualification! That's right, 2 main event matches between these two, and twice ending with no clear winner! Eh? What's that? I am not hearing any people typing their apologies to those of us who told you that screwjob finishes were very common before Vince McMahon! But as bad as all of that might look, none of those were what we're here to review. The whole thing was to set up a final match that would take place on Christmas that same year back at Reunion Arena. There was a whole angle where Flair paid off Gary Hart to get one of his wrestlers to hurt Kerry, only for the plot to be exposed by, of all people, King Kong Bundy. All of this led World Class and the NWA to declare not only would this final match take place inside a steel cage, but there would need to be more authority in this match. A special enforcer would be in the cage to help maintain order. And just who would the enforcer be? Why, none other than the most famous resident of Bad Street, USA! Yep, it was at this same time that the world-class audience was introduced to the fabulous Freebirds, Terry Gordy and Michael P.S. Hayes. And even though from the beginning their flashy style seemed to counter the clean-cut personas of the beloved Von Erichs, the fans in Texas took to the Freebirds quite quickly, which for what it's worth made what would eventually happen a pretty bold move. The execution is where it all goes south. So, just a few weeks after premiering at the Sportatorium, it was announced that via a fan vote, Michael Hayes would be named the special enforcer for the World Championship cage match between Flair and Kerry Von Erich. The stage was set on Christmas night at Reunion Arena, a building that had yet to even see an NBA playoff game at that time, was going to feature the biggest name in all of wrestling, putting his belt on the line against one of Dallas's own. And not only was Michael Hayes in the cage as a special enforcer, he brings in Terry Gordy on the outside to ensure that no one can leave the cage. So with all of that in Kerry Von Erich's favor, what could possibly go wrong? Just about everything. Let's start with how 10 minutes into the match, Kerry grinds Flair's head into the cage itself, giving Flair the opportunity to blade himself. Who are we supposed to root for here again? I don't think I'm making it up to say most wrestling fans are going to side with the guy who gets busted open first in a match, especially if he ends up the only one bleeding. Yeah, I get that it's no disqualification, so this isn't breaking any rules, and surely Kerry couldn't help being able to take advantage of that with how Flair screwed him over in previous matches, but oh, you'll see. So 14 minutes in, Flair gets the figure 4 on Kerry, but Kerry reverses it to get Flair to break it. Flair tries to climb out of the cage, but that just leads to Kerry showing us more crack than ever needs to be seen. Finally, it's about 18 minutes until things really start to happen. Kerry finally gets the famous Von Erich claw on the bloodied Flair, but Hayes forces Kerry to break the hold because Flair had his foot on the rope for less than a second before it fell off in a no disqualification match. Naturally, Kerry and the crowd are a bit pissed off when Hayes rips him off of Flair, but oh, that's nothing compared to what's to come. Now Flair starts to tussle with Hayes for reasons, and this causes Hayes to just completely lose it. And he just punches Flair out and yells at Kerry to cover him. And Kerry won't do it. Why not? Because it's not the honorable way to win or some crap? So, just minutes ago, you were using the cage as a cheese grater on Flair's head, but now you don't want to win because someone else knocked him out? Was the babyface code for the NWA written by Barney Stinson? And that's what leads to the big moment. Hayes just gets fed up and walks out of the cage, with Gordy slamming the cage door in Kerry's face. This supposedly gives Kerry a concussion. And while I'm no doctor, I could possibly see this as the break Flair needs to get a quick pinfall, except it isn't. That's not the finish. The match goes on for another 3 minutes, with Kerry supposedly suffering from that blow from the door, until he finally delivers his own knockout punch, but then falls to the canvas himself and...
Bleary-eyed on the mat. Ric Flair is the winner. Ric Flair declared the winner. Kerry looks like he is holding his head and his eyes are glassy. And he's lying on the mat.
Yeah, that's the finish. Even though Flair was down and out first, the referee David Manning declares Flair the winner on Kerry supposedly no longer being able to continue due to what? Getting Flair's blood in his eyes? Oh, believe me, if this was 2022 instead of 1982, wrestling Twitter would have gone ape over this finish. And yes, everyone! You're gonna pay me for that plug, right? And the post-match comes with Kerry's brothers entering the cage, and of course they blame the Freebirds for costing Kerry the match, even though it was clearly David Manning's BS call on Flair. David Manning, everyone! Pro wrestling's version of Don Dankinger! I really wanted to like this match, since it was the big heel turn for the fabulous Freebirds. But in hindsight, when the big fallout of the match was putting over guys who weren't even wrestling in the big event, I should have known Bull Honky would have been involved. This was clearly the NWA refusing to take the belt off of Flair because the Crockett family in Flair's Carolina territory still had more clout than the Von Erichs, but Fritz wouldn't let his boy eat a pinfall of any type, so this ridiculous screwjob finish was the compromise. Let's just say this won't be the last time Fritz's ego would lead to a terrible finish. The only good thing to come out of it was the 2-year-long feud between the Von Erichs and the Freebirds. which ended with the Freebirds losing a series of loser leaves town matches in December of 1984 so they could jump ship to Vince McMahon's outfit, only to get fired less than a year later because they got on Andre the Giant's bad side. Woof. As far as Kerry went, he would finally get the NWA World title in May of 1984 when he beat Flair in the main event of the Parade of Champions event at Texas Stadium. But even that was likely a token gesture by the NWA in pity after Kerry's brother David Von Erich had tragically died. And then they proceeded to make Kerry drop the belt back to Flair just 2 weeks later. Supposedly because Kerry was already showing the signs of the drug use that would plague him for the rest of his life. Driving the knife further, he was made to drop the belt in Japan, the same country where David died. And you all thought Vince McMahon was petty, sending CM Punk his release papers on his wedding day. All this just led to further schisms between Fritz Von Erich and Jim Crockett, with the latter declaring in 1986 that he would no longer allow Flair to work in Texas, and that drove Fritz to say screw you to the NWA and go completely independent. How would that end up? Oh, patience, my young Padawans. But even with all of that, at least the people who were there in Reunion Arena on December 25th, 1982, and those who watched the match on TV days later knew who the champion was and would be the next time they tuned in. Next time, we're gonna show you what may be the biggest psych in wrestling history.